In Chassidus, there is a discussion about form and formlessness. The title of the discussion, if that was necessary, would be Yecholes versus Koyach. Yecholes versus Koyach. Later on, I'll give you alternative labels, but in the meantime, these are the terms we're going to stick with. Yecholes versus Koyach. Yecholes means possibility. Koyach also could mean possibility, but koyach would connote more potential or power. You can even translate the word koyach as tool. And the discussions in Chassidus about these two terms, yecholes and koyach, articulate a great distinction between these two concepts, or between these two words, the Hebrew word yecholes and the Hebrew word koyach. To use a physical example to help us understand the difference between yecholes and koyach, koyach would be the ability to throw a ball. Yecholes, would be the possibility to throw the ball in a direction. The difference between the ability to throw a ball and throw a ball in a direction is obvious. Throwing a ball, the power to throw a ball, is part of you. You have a strength that involves a physical power in your arm, and of course a focus and a concentration and an aim, and so on, that allows you to throw the ball in a particular place. Directions are not part of you, they're part of the environment. They're simply available to you. Because they're available to you, you can throw in any direction. So throwing a ball is a koyach. Throwing a ball east, west, north, or south is a yecholes. That's a physical illustration. To explain this in metaphysical terms, in more spiritual terms, I'll use a terminology which I recall seeing in Maamar Chassidus, although I don't recall where I saw it, so that's a bit of a problem, but I believe this is an expression which is found in Chassidus. And the expression would be the following: that the difference between the word koyach and the word yecholes would be that koyach is yeshnei b'mitzias b'ba'al koyach, and yecholes is einei b'mitzias b'ba'al yecholes. And I'll translate those words in English, obviously. A koyach means that the possessor of a koyach has a form that is representative of that koyach within himself, as opposed to the possessor of a yecholes does not have a form within himself that represents his yecholes. Now that I sort of told you the terms and gave you the basic definitions, let me try and explain it to you. Let's talk about godliness first. Godliness is infinite. What is infinity? What does infinity mean? Now, of course, that depends on how many minutes you thought about it, and how much education you have, and how many other people's minds you tapped. But what does infinity mean? Infinity means everything. Infinity means any possibility in an infinite way. So infinity includes ideas, feelings, senses. It includes wisdom and understanding and kindness and severity, and on and on and on and on. Infinity has within itself all possibilities. But at the same time, there's something else that's true of infinity. Infinity is indivisible. Infinity is one. Which means to say that when infinity has infinite possibilities, those infinite possibilities are not different parts of the infinity, because infinity has no parts. They're all part of the plainness of the infinity. In other words, in infinity there's no wisdom. In infinity there's no understanding. In infinity there's no kindness or severity or exactitude. In infinity there's infinity, which means that it automatically includes the concept of wisdom and understanding and kindness and severity, but they don't exist as distinct faculties. They don't exist as distinct aspects. Or to use the Hebrew term, they're not toyadim pratim, they're not individual descriptions, they're part of the simple infinitude, if you will. On the other hand, when you talk about the concept of form, and let's use a Kabbalistic term, kelim, or vessels, by definition, you're talking about distinct faculties. the vessel or the faculty of wisdom, the vessel, the faculty of understanding, the vessel or the faculty of kindness, or the vessel or the faculty of severity and exactitude, and so on. In other words, when you're talking about an infinite plainness, all exists as part of that plainness. When you start talking about individual faculties, here there is separation. Wisdom is by itself, understanding is by itself, kindness is by itself, and severity and exactitude are by themselves, and so forth. So there's a lot of discussion in Chassidus about Yechelis and Koyach. Yechelis means Hashem is everything. Because He's everything, He has a possibility for anything. But inasmuch as Hashem is everything and has a possibility for anything, nothing exists actually. There isn't actual kindness, actual wisdom, actual understanding, and actual severity and exactitude. There is simply the possibility for all these things. Part of infinity is infinite possibility. However, on a lower level, where you speak of individual faculties, you would say God possesses, or godliness possesses, the individual faculty and tool and potential, which is wisdom, the individual faculty or tool or potential or strength, which is understanding, and kindness and severity and exactitude, and so forth. That's the difference between Yechelis and Koyach. So basically the difference between Yechelis and Koyach is, Yechelis means one infinity that includes all possibility, and Koyach means a bunch of different distinct aspects, distinct qualities that are separated from one another by some kind of metaphysical division, whether it's spatial or it's form. But there are divisions, there are individual aspects that represent the various faculties that were originally part of the infinity. So on the level of the infinite plainness, we would call it a possibility, a yecheles. On the level of individual faculties, we would call it a koyach, individual tools. The simplest illustration of this would be the difference between oil and keli, light and a vessel. There's one light. The light is called Ein Sof. There are 10 vessels, and the vessels are called kelim, the vessels are called midos, the vessels are called toyerim, the vessels are called gavnim, which means colors, and so forth. The light is one, the vessels are many. So the various faculties that are represented in an individual and distinct way in the vessels are possibilities in the single light. But in the light, they're only a yecheles, they're only a possibility. They're not a koyach, because the light doesn't have any parts. The light is one indivisible light that has the possibility to take on the form of chesed if it goes into such a vessel, take on the form of gvur if it goes into such a vessel, and so forth. But the vessels are distinct. It's a yecheles and a koyach. The concept of yecheles and koyach also exists in the neshama. On the very, very highest levels of the neshama, we say the neshama is yachol, has a possibility. The plain infinity of the neshama has no distinguishable aspects. It's one infinite unity of potential, and within that potential there is the potential for everything which will emerge from that human being's soul as it comes down into a body. Once the soul goes into the body, obviously, the infinite soul is divided up. There's one faculty on the right side of the brain, we call it chokhmah. There's one soul on the left side of the brain, we call that bina. There's one faculty representative of the right arm, we call that chesed. There's one faculty representative of the left arm, we call that gevura, and so forth. So when the neshama goes into the guf, the one all-inclusive possibility, the infinite possibility that is the soul, is divided up into the various body parts, the various limbs and aspects of the body. But of course, Chassidus delves much more deeply into this. Chassidus argues that the infinite plane neshama could never meet the body. They're too far apart. If the soul was an infinite plainness, like using the metaphor of light, and the only screen that would accommodate the vision would be the body, it would short circuit. It could not possibly be sustained. And Chassidus therefore says that way before the neshama ever enters into the body, there's the emergence of koyach. In other words, a neshama in Gan Eden, on the very, very highest level, is yachol, has all kinds of possibilities. But from that level of yachol radiates koyach, tools, faculties. And those tools within the soul itself descend from a higher level to a lower level and to a lower level. And after they've been sufficiently formed and sufficiently limited, the lowest level of koyach, as it exists in the neshama, comes into the guf and individuates, if you will. The koyach of chachma goes into the right side of the brain, koyach of bina going into the left side of the brain, the koyach of chesed going into the right arm, and the koyach of gvura going into the left arm, and so on. In other words, the difference between Yechilas and koyach is not only neshama and guf. The difference of Yechilas and koyach is actually neshama and neshama. The very highest level of the neshama has no detail, has no form, it's an infinite plainness. All it has is a yochel, a possibility to be all kinds of things. But the minute you go down to a lower notch within the neshama, even as the neshama exists by itself, in Gan Eden for lack of words, you already encounter potential koyach, individuation, faculties. And the koyach goes through a series of steps until it's become sufficiently reduced or sufficiently divided or sufficiently formed to actually manifest in the body. And since you're techno-Kabbalists and you're going to keep track of every little detail that I say and observe every error that I make, I will share the basic form that it says in the Maamar Chassidis, that in general, a koyach, mireishes hamshachasei, at seif giluyo yesh shalosh madreges. The emergence of a tool, of a potential from the possibility within the infinite neshama has 3 steps. Meaning to say, the level of the neshama called yachal, where no detail exists, is only an infinite plainness that has possibilities for many different things. That as it comes forward, metamorphoses into individuated faculties, koyches, until those faculties have been so formed that they can actually go into a body, there's 3 steps. And these 3 steps are called basically in Hebrew, koyches atzmiyim, koyches ne'elamiyim, and koyches gluyim. Koyches, that means tools on a level of essence, which of course, as you know, I like to translate tools as they exist in relationship with themselves. This is called nefesh koilo koyches. Then koyches ne'elam means tools as they are hidden within the neshama, and then koyches giluyim means tools as they're actually revealed from the neshama. So if this were a discourse on Yechilas and koyach, I would summarize the conversation I've had with you for the last few minutes by saying, if what I just said is true, you have 4 levels. The first level is Yechilas, the second level is koyach atzmi, the second level is koyach ne'elam, and the 4th level is koyach goloi. And there are many Maimorim that explore this. You have Yitan Lecha and Samach Vav. You have it in one of the Maimorim of Tafshin Vav, I believe, from the previous Rebbe. You also have this in Samaches Shvuas. Samaches Shvuas is a Maimon as a Sfira Sagnuzis. I believe it's the second Maimon, and he discusses these 4 levels as well. Now, the mashal, the analogy, the illustration, the example, which is used to represent these 4 levels, would be the following. And I'm going to go backwards. It's just easier for me. Koychas HaGiluyim would be represented by flame, by actual fire. Actual fire is not only heat, but actual flame. The revealed faculties are the most limited, they're the most formed, like a flame. The Koychas Ne'elamim, the hidden faculties, would be represented by Eish B'tei Hagachelas, fire inside a coal, where you don't see any flame, but you blow on the coal and it emerges. Koyches Atzmiyim, the 3rd level, the highest level of koyach, of tool, of individuation, would be represented by Tzorach HaLamish, fire in a flint. In a flint, the fire is not b'metzias at all. It's Helam Sheni b'metzias. It says in Chassidus, Yesh Sham Choim K'tzat, there's a little bit of heat in a flint. I would wonder what that means in physics, but that's how the Maimorim describe it. The only relationship between a flint and fire that has a little bit of heat. You strike it and the fire is extracted. And of course, since in a flint the fire is not at all real, you can soak a flintstone 1,000 years under the ocean, pull it out, strike it, and you'll get a spark. So the 3 levels of koyach, from the lowest to the highest, are represented by the maximum form, which would be flames, by a hidden form, which would be fire inside a coal, and by an absolutely invisible form, which would be fire inside a flintstone. The level of Yechilas is represented by the word shem. Shemois, or shem, a name. A name of a person represents the person. but in the name of the person, nothing that that person will become is revealed and present. And I'm not going to explain this at length because it's not our topic, and it would take a long time for me to explain. But you have this talk in the Maamar in Samaches, the second Maamar of Shvuah Samaches. Maybe it's Korav Hashem B'chol Kedah, but I don't remember. I didn't look it up tonight. Where Yochayles is represented by the idea of a name being a possibility for many different things. Koiches Atzimim is represented by a flint. Koiches Ne'elamim is represented by a fiery coal. And Koiches Agiloim represented by a flame and fire. And just for the purposes of comprehensiveness, there's Maimorim, especially from our Rebbe, where he talks about two levels of name. You have it also in Samach Vav, Shem and Shemois, many names and one name, where many names is lower than one name. But this is enough as far as we're concerned. So what did I just share with you? What I just shared with you is the idea that philosophically and mystically, everything starts out as one. Why does everything start out as one? Because Einod Milvade, there is nothing but God. And nothing but God means that just as there's only one God and not two gods, God is one. And there's no two parts to this one God. There's no detail, there's no form at all to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God Almighty is called a Metzias, Bilti Metzias Nimtza. He exists in what's considered a non-existential way. This is mentioned in Mer Nevuchim, Chelik Al Perik Nun Ches, I believe. And obviously, as Hashem is true on the level of Metzias, Bilti Metzias Nimtza, within Him exists everything, but nothing is actual. Nothing is even potential. It's only possible. Hashem has infinite possibility. He's Yachal. He's free to do anything. But as Yocheles exists within Him, it's a part of His oneness and His plainness. There's no form, there's no detail, there's no division whatsoever. And of course, as God Almighty radiates, brings forward light, godliness, and then vessels, and then worlds, until you have the creation of our physical world, we're going from the one to the many, from the unified to the divided, from Yocheles to Koyach, from a possibility to a potential, meaning to say, from a level where there's only one, but in that one there's infinite possibilities, to a level where there's many tools, many faculties. And in this concept of faculties or tools or form, you have it on the level of Etzem, you have it on the level of Helam, and you have it on the level of Gilui. So there's a journey from one to many, from sublime to formed and actual, from theoretical to material, and so on. And the highest levels, all there is Yecheles. On the lower levels, what emerges is Koyach. Why am I saying all of this? I am saying all of this because the concept that we're going to be exploring tonight is the 10 Sfiras, Esses Sfiras. And as you recall from last week, we talked a lot about the concept of godliness, and we also talked about the two basic concepts of godliness, Ma'od and Adam, or Oid and Kli. Those two concepts in a basic way, in a general way, in other words, in a not entirely precise way, but sufficient for this conversation, Oid would be Yocheles and Keli would be Koyach, or Paltiel. Oid would be how there's infinite possibility and no form that's specific, while Kli would be individual possibility. So the conversation we're going to have tonight about Oid and Kli, light and vessels, is to a certain degree aligned, consistent with the difference between Yocheles and Koyach that I just described. So now, let me ask a foolish question. And oftentimes foolish questions are just deceptively foolish, but they're not foolish at all. What's better, Yocheles or Koyach? What's better? Possibility or potential? What's better, to have an infinite plainness where everything exists on a possible level, or to have individuated faculties divided by form and by vessel and by body even? What's better? Yocheles or Koyach? And of course, that question cannot be answered without a context. If somebody would ask you what's better, Yocheles or Koyach, you would immediately say, in relationship with what? If you're talking about God, obviously Yocheles is better than Koyach. It's closer to the unity. But if you're talking about the world, and you're talking about the world's purpose, Koyach is much better than Yocheles. Why? Because the world is actual, and the world is distinct. The world is made up of separate parts. Not only is the world full of separate koyches, The world is actually a creation that's made up of billions and billions of separate poyel. Koyach means potential. Poyel means the actualization of those potentials, which means real limit, real form, real division of time and space and form and purpose, and so on. So if you ask the question, what's better, Yechelis or Koyach, you'd be a fool to answer the question without saying, in relationship with what? In relationship with the purpose of creation, Koyach is far closer to the realization of that purpose than Yechelis is. Because in Yechelis there's really no reality. There's reality as it's a part of a possibility. While in Koyach there's reality as it's part of a potential and a strength and a form. And then from that potential comes the actual reality is real. So in terms of Achdus, in terms of the unity and the truth of God, Yechelis is much closer to the ultimate unity, and Koyach is much farther from the ultimate unity. But in terms of the Matar of Tachlis, in terms of the purpose of creation, Koyach is many steps closer to that purpose than is Yechelis. And this question and answer, what's better, Yechelis or Koyach, and the idea that I just said, is going to set up what will become tonight's conversation, which is the following. Assuming we understand the concept of 10 spheres, assuming we understand the concept of godliness, assuming we understand the concept of things starting out as unity and plainness and possibility, and they end up as division and form and potential and actualization. Clearly, from an idealized perspective, in other words, from God's perspective, from the unity perspective, Yechelis is closer to the truth than Koyach is. Oid is closer to the truth than Keli is. Plain infinity is closer to the truth than divided up forms, of course. But the issue is, if the purpose of God's creation is to have an actual world, and if the purpose of God's creation is to have an actual world which is divided up into many parts, does that mean that the world as we know it is the farthest thing from the unity that is God? The lowest world, or as this Maamar will explore, the world of Atzilus. In Atzilus you have actual vessels and actual revealed light going into the actual vessels, means actual division, not only potential but actual. Is it a correct or an incorrect statement to say that Atzilus, in as much as it is the most divisive relative to the worlds above it, and the most formed relative to the worlds above it, is it a true or false statement that godliness in form, or the worlds as they are formed, is the farthest thing from unity that exists in the level of Yechelis? True or false? And of course the simple answer should be true, of course. The higher levels where things are more unified and more plain and more closer to Yechelis is closer to that truth. The lower levels would be further from that truth. But that would mean that the divine purpose is fundamentally flawed. That would mean that the reason why God Almighty created the world is to have an environment which is the farthest thing from the ideal form of unity which is represented by Yechelis. And that somehow doesn't sound right. It doesn't make sense that the purpose which the Eibishter created the world, which is to have an actual world and a divided world, would be furthest from the idea of unity, which is God's own truth, as represented in tonight's conversation by the word Yechelis or the word Or, as opposed to the word Koyach or the word Kli. And therefore, this Maamar is going to take us on a journey. The journey is, of course, going to begin by arguing that Yechelis is better than Koyach. That infinite unity on a level of possibility is more unified, is closer to God, than divided up, individuated forms that are in individual vessels and limbs is on a level of Koyach and level of Paltiel. But the end is going to be the argument that the lowest world, the world where the purpose is fulfilled, and in the context of this Maamar, that's Atzilus, where there's the maximum division, the maximum form, the maximum separations, there is a unique kind of unity, which means that although it's the lowest world and the furthest from the unity, it has an alternative unity, a different concept of unity, which makes it superior to many of the worlds above itself. In plain English, okay? If unity is better than division, then the lowest world, which is the most divided, is the worst world. We all agree to that. But the lowest world is the purpose. How could the worst world be the purpose? Unless the answer is that somehow in this most divisive of worlds, where there is the antithesis of unity, there is a different concept of unity that actually flips this chesaron, this deficiency of division, on its head, and it becomes a very, very unique advantage rather than a disadvantage. And this is what's going to happen tonight. We're going to journey through the spheres. We're going to journey through levels of form and levels of formlessness, levels of unity and levels of division. And we're going to end with saying that the maximum world of division, since it's the purpose of the divine creation in an ironic way, in a strange kind of way, has a unity which equals to or perhaps exceeds the unity in the higher worlds. That is our intent. That's our direction. And I'm going to try my best not to play my hand. I'll keep you in suspense until we get to it. Okay? There's my introduction. So we begin on line 16. Let's begin tonight's conversation by quoting the statement of Eliyahu Hanavi. Right? We say Pasach Eliyahu every Friday. There are some Jews who say Pasach Eliyahu every day. Pasach Eliyahu means Eliyahu began. Eliyahu was a physical man. The person named Eliyahu Hanavi said, and this is of course in the Hagdama, in the introduction to the Tikkun Zayah, which is a section of Zayah, and he says the following words: "And who you are he, the apika zasar tikkunim, that brought forward 10 tikkunim." Tikkunim means vessels. Tikkunim means pieces of jewelry, adornments, and also corrections. Vakarin and lahain, and you called forward in these 10 vessels, eser sfira, the 10 lights, the 10 individuated faculties of alakus, of godliness, which are really separated by the vessels, are called spheres, are called lights, because the light goes into the vessels, and the combination of the light and the vessel is called a sphera. And I've mentioned this to you in previous classes. A fascinating and underrated piece of Chassidic material. The Alter Rebbe was imprisoned, and he was cross-examined, and he wrote a lengthy dissertation to explain what Chassidus is and what Kabbalah is and what he is and so on. And part of what he discusses is the 10 spheres. And he calls the 10 spheres 10 lights, which is why I'm using that translation. Spheres means lights. And it's also known, and it's mentioned in the introduction to the Sefer Bat Kodesh, which is now printed in the Igros Kodesh, the letters of the Mittler Rebbe. When the Mittler Rebbe was arrested, the Alter Rebbe's son, he rewrote that essay that the Alter Rebbe had written and elaborated on it further, explaining even more the 10 spheres and the Oiris and Kalim to Goyim Lahavdol, which he needed for his court proceedings. And it was printed years and years ago in a little pamphlet called Bad Kodesh. It's now been reprinted in the Mittler Rebbe's letters. But the whole point of the whole thing is that the word spheres is translated by the Alter Rebbe himself as lights. But 10 lights. How can you have 10 lights? Light is one. And the answer is because the 10 vessels force the lights to be separate. Chesed is the right arm. Chochma is in the mind, the brain. Bina is in the heart. Each one of the spheres has a distinct and known name or label. Meaning to say, each one of the 10 spheres is so pronounced, is so actual, that we can understand it, we can relate to it. Even though the spheres of Atzilus are godliness, but because the spheres of Atzilus are individual, Chachma and Chesed and Bina and Gevura, we can know them and understand them at least a little bit. While Va'ant, you yourself, meaning godliness that's above the 10 spheres, Les L'Shem Yediyah. You don't have a known name. We don't know how to identify. Godliness, as it comes down to the 10 spheres, is Koyach, or Poyel. It's actualization and form and distinctness. We can know. But as godliness is above those distinctions, we say, Les L'Shem Yediyah, there's no name by which we can know you. And then we add, Antu Chakim, you are wise, but V'lei B'Chachma Yediyah. The wisdom that exists in you is unknown. And to Maven you are understanding, but the understanding as it exists in you is unknown. Meaning to say, on the level of Atzilus, there are 10 spheres that are called Yediyah, we know them. On the level higher than Atzilus, there's also 10 spheres, but we don't know them. And simplistically and generally, or basically, and as I explained it to you, the reason higher than Atzilus is Chochmah and you don't know it, and Bina and you don't know it, because Chochmah exists, but not as the potential, as a possibility. It doesn't exist in a form, in a distinct faculty or vessel or form. It's part of the infinite oneness, and therefore it's unknown. Says the Rebbe, in line 19, he makes an interesting observation. Tchila Hiskir, the order of this essay, Paschalio begins, doesn't mamish begin, but near the beginning it says, Chochma Bina, the two faculties, Chochma Bina, as they're in vessels. Chochma Meicha, Chochma is in the mind. Bina Liba, Bina is in the heart, which means to say that the Eliyahu Navi is talking about the 10 spheres of Atzilus, which are truly divided from one another by their vessels. But says the Rebbe Dal Terebu, Mao Shamachakach, and afterwards it says, Antu Chakim, you are wise, but your wisdom is unknown. In other words, the question of the Alter Rebbe is that the Paschal Yo goes in order, right? Rebein Omen, Antu Chad V'Lebe Chushman, Antu Ilol Kol Ilol, Stimen Dechol Stimen, Leismach Shoet Fisa Beklov, Antu Dapikas Asarti Kunin. In other words, the Paschal Yo starts from the Eibishter himself and then works its way closer and closer to form. And by the way, in the Hemshech Shvuas Samaches, I think this is even in the first Maamar, he actually translates the Paschal Yo in order from the very first words. Antu Chad Lebe Chushben, Antu Ilah Kalos, Stima Kol Stimin, Leismach Shot Fisa Beklal, and so on. He goes through from the beginning. And the 10 spheres are a couple of lines into the Paschal Yo. And the question therefore is, if the Paschal Yo is written in a sequential, in an orderly fashion, from the higher levels to the lower levels, from the level of Shemes to Keches Atzmim, to Keches Nalamim, to Keches Agiluyim, in other words, from Yechelis to Koyach, why would you talk about Koyach and then go back to Yechelis? Because after he describes Hashem as having actual divided forms and spheres in Atzilus, it says, Antu Chakim V'Lei B'Chochma Yadir, your wisdom is unknown. Says the Rebbe, this certainly does not mean this allusion to you are wise but your wisdom isn't known is not an allusion to the wisdom he said before, the wisdom of Atzilus, which is from the 10 spheres. Why? When he talked about the 10 spheres, which is before, it said, we know exactly what they are, we can understand them, we can study them, they have names. And later he says, the 10 spheres that he's describing afterwards are unknown. Antu Chakam, you're a wise, says the Rebbe, this indicates the Pirish Antu Chakim, that this second part of the sequence, where he says you're wise but your wisdom is unknown, who Gamkin is included, and the level of godliness which is above form, and therefore above being understood and above being known. Ve'ilu, as opposed to as godliness manifests in the 10 spheres of Atzilus, we can know the godliness. Now godliness is one and plain and infinite. How can you know it? And of course the answer is you can't know the godliness, you can know the vessel, the kli. And through the vessel you can come to know the Ein Sof. When the godliness goes through the vessel, the light itself has a name, Lefi HaSfira, according to the Sfira Shemeslabish Ba, in which it reveals itself, as the Kabbalah that Ramak explains it, V'kanal Shem Kel B'Chesed V'chulu, like we discussed above, Kel is in Chesed, and so on. And it's interesting that you have different Maimonic Hasidus who follow different opinions in Kabbalah. There's an opinion that compares the light going into the vessels like water in a colored glass, or light in a colored glass. Where the color, where the difference is only in the vessel. The light is really one, the water is really one. The vessel makes it appear to have a color. And then in other Maimarim, they give the example of the neshama coming into the guf, where the color, where the detail is not only in the body, it's also in the neshama. And these two opinions conform to the machlekes of Kabbalah of Eidos Pshutim and Eidos Mitzvah, where the mashal of Mayim B'Kli Meguvin would be Eidos Pshutim, and the mashal of Chayis and Nefesh Meguf would be a mashal for Eidos Mitzvah. But be that as it may, even according to the Shita of Eretz Mitzvah, the light before it goes into the vessel is plain, and when the light goes into the vessel, it takes on form. The question therefore becomes, again, if Eliyahu Hanavi is going in order, and he starts off with the Eibishter himself, once he talks about the 10 revealed spheres, why would he go back and say, that on the one hand we call him wise, and at the same time, we don't know his wisdom. And why is it written afterwards? if it's going in order, once you get to Atzilus, don't go back to Kesed, move on to Bria. And saying that the level of wisdom which is unknown to us, after describing the wisdom of Atzilus, seems to be out of order. Ela Pirish on line 28. The Rebbe proceeds to answer the question. The Metchila, the Eliyahu Navi begins on the highest levels. And what does he say about the highest levels? That the unity of God is such that he's not even one. There's no number. And of course, you and I would call that Yochelis or Shemus, based on the conversation we had at the outset of today's Shir. And then we say like this, that V'afal gavda pikas aser tikun. And later on, from that infinite plainness will radiate 10 vessels and 10 lights, which will join with those vessels. Shehem as the spheres the tikkun, which are the 10 spheres of the world called tikkun, which means order and correctness. The Atzilus in the world of Atzilus. Ashakol sphere bechinim yuchedes. Each sphere is separated and divided by the vessel primarily. Mizul lost from every other sphere. Chochma, Chesed, Chuli. So you have the unity which is above Atzilus. And then you have the division and the formations in Atzilus. So the Rebbe says now on line 30, one may have thought that if at the end of the line, if in Atzilus, godliness is transformed from Yechelis to Keich, from Keich to Peyo, perhaps Shagam Baha'atzmos, Yesh Chas V'Sholem, perhaps in the Eibishter himself, so to speak, there is, God forbid, Gam Kein Bechines Miyuchadas, individual faculties, such as Chochma, Chesed, V'Chol. If, when you get to Atzilus, when you get to the lower worlds, there's real form, like I said to you before, separate Koiches, and even Peyo, so you should extrapolate from what you know to what you don't know, and assume that just like on the lowest levels there's real form and real division and real detail, on the highest levels there is a higher form and a higher order and a higher detail. Says the Rebbe, so differently he has to repeat himself. He is going in order, but he finds it necessary to go in a circle. He starts off with Atzmos and goes through various levels of godliness, then gets to the 10 spheres, and then he says that although he creates Chochmah as a koyach and as a poil in Atzilus, in him it's not a koyach and a poil, it's a yechelis. It's part of the infinite possibilities. Let's say the layman in other words. The reason Chochmah in the world of Atzilus is called known Chochmah, that afal pi she gam came be emes la maila maila. When you compare Chochmah of Atzilus, which is Ein Sof, to Chochmah bia, which is Neshama, which is limited, they're incomparable. Nevertheless, the Chochmah of Atzilus is explicably the source of Chochmah of Bria. Since Chochmah of Atzilus is a root and a source for Chochmah of Bria, Nikras Chochmah Yediyah, Atzilus is considered known. Even though we don't understand how you can have infinite form, Chochmah, which is Ein Sof, is a contradiction in terms, but that's the case. Chochmah is a koyach, a sphira in Atzilus. And at the same time, its light is infinite, which is odd and strange. In Bria, Chochmah is a form, and the light is also limited. Says the Rebbe, nevertheless, Mekomokim still, Kivan Shimoka V'Sherish Lahen, Chochmah of Atzilus is a source and a root for Chochmah of Bria. So although in Atzilus Chochmah is actually limitless, Nikras Chochmah Yediyah, we consider Chochmah limited because we see what happens to it in the next world. That in Atzilus Ubechinas Kelim Mamish is actual divisions of vessels. Chochmah Yesh Lakli B'fnei Atzmei, Chochmah had its own vessel. Bina B'fnei Atzmei, Bina had its own vessel, and so forth. But it's only true at the end of the line in Atzilus. Real form, real division, real actualization. Avo Mada'antu Chakim, higher than Atzilus, where Hashem is called Chakim, V'lei B'Chochmah Yediyah, where His wisdom is unknowable cloud. We're arguing that although in Atzilus Chochmah is divided up into aspect, in Ein Sof they're one. There's no divisions. And you shouldn't think that since at the end of the road there's going to be a division of aspects, it must be that in potential these divisions already existed. We say no. On the highest levels, they don't even exist in potential, they exist only in possibility. And in as much as exist in possibility, there's no divisions whatsoever. Says the Rebbe, Al derech hishavos yesh meyayin. Like the creation of a thing from a non-thing, without any gradualism, without any proximity whatsoever. So just like we understand the thing from a non-thing cannot be explained, the division of form in Atzilus from the plainness and the infinity of Yochelis, higher than Atzilus, cannot be explained. And it continues in line 38, the difference between Chochma Vatzilas from Ein Sof is quite different than the division of Chochma Vatzilas from Chochma Bria. Why? Because although Atzilas is Ein Sof and Bria is Gevul, from Atzilas to Bria is considered Ishtalshalos. The reason we refer to Chochma Atzilas as known is because from it will come Chochma Bria, which we can actually know. How is it known? Whereas, because of Chochma Bria being created from Chochma Vatzilas, through a series of steps called the chain reaction of worlds. And Bria's Chochma we can understand because it's truly finite. Accordingly, Chochma Vatzilas would be called Chochma Yediyah, known Chochma, because it's the basis and the source of Chochma Bria. For example, that from Atzilas comes Bria, the Adam of Atzilas is the source of Adam of Bria until Adam of Asiyah. Line 42, when you're talking about Ein Sof, which is higher than Atzilas, do not see it as 10 individuated, 10 separate koiches or spheres that are more theoretically divided. It's not the case. It's Leiber Chochma, it's unknown. Because higher than Atzilas, there isn't 10 hidden spheres, there's a unity of Ein Sof. In the language of the Pardis, Eser spheres hagnuzes b'ma'atzilan. The 10 spheres that are hidden in their radiation, in their source, hidden in the Eibishter himself, so to speak, is Eser spheres hagnuzes, 10 hidden spheres, which is the source of 10 revealed spheres. Now, the deal is this. The concept of 10 hidden spheres is brought in Kabbalah, explained in Chassidus. And Chassidus actually says that there's a dispute, there's different opinions about Eser spheres hagnuzes. In short, the difference between the different opinions of Esferes Agnuzis is whether you can say Esferes Agnuzis only in Koyach, or you can actually say Esferes Agnuzis only in Yechelas. In other words, one opinion in Kabbalah says you can't say that Hashem has hidden spheres. You can say Hashem is above spheres. You can only say hidden spheres when the spheres exists actually on a hidden level. In other words, one opinion is Esferes Agnuzis begins with Akudim, with Keches Atzmiyim, but not with Yechelas. The other opinion says that as the spheres Agnuzis exists in oil, light by itself has the potential for 10 hidden spheres, and the 10 hidden spheres as they're included in light is as the spheres Agnuzis. The difference between the first opinion and the second opinion that I just mentioned is the first opinion sees as the spheres Agnuzis only in Kalim, in Metzias, and the second opinion sees as the spheres Agnuzis in oil as well. This Maamar seems to be following the second view, that in Or you have 10 spheres, but you don't have 10 at all. You have one infinitely plain light with possibility, for many things, for Chochmah, for Chesed, for Bina, for Gvura, and so on, but as exists in the Ein Sof, it's one. Stop. We're holding on line 45. So what did we learn? We learned basically two things. The spheres of Atzilus are Koyach or Poyel in division. The spheres as they exist in the Ein Sof are Yechelas and unity. And any division is going to emerge later and does not exist at the level of Yechelas. So once we established these two concepts of plainness and form, the Rebbe allows himself to complicate it by dividing it up into three. And to be sure that this division into three is only a basic division. But if you understand the subtlety of this, you understand that once you divide it up into more than two, from Yechelas to Koyach, you can divide it up into hundreds of different levels. And the Rebbe says on line 45, this idea of spheres existing in infinite and unified plainness at the level of Ein Sof, Yechelas, and spheres existing in an individuated and divided and formed level, as they manifest in Kalim, on the level of 10 spheres of Atzilus, these two concepts are entirely consistent with a Kabbalistic idea. That it says in Kabbalah, there's three worlds. Akudim, Nukudim, and Berudim. Now we know of only two. This Maamar brings three, and this is very, very, very important. What's the difference between these three worlds? This means In the world of Akudim, you have 10 vessels, 10 spheres. But the light is so powerful, so potent, it makes the 10 become one. That's the word Akudim means. You have 10 spheres tied together. Now, to be sure, in most Maimarim, Akudim would be parallel to Keiches Atzmim, not to Yecheles. Here, the Alter Rebbe doesn't go into that subtlety. Ak would be like Yecheles. And in Sof Shlafnei Tzimtzum, it would be like Yecheles. But Akudim would already be, it says in Ezel's writings, in Kabbalah, it's brought in Chassidus, that Akudim was Cheles or Atzilus. So, Kli Echad is still Kli Echad. But as far as we're concerned, as far as this Maimon is concerned, Akudim is a part of the idea of Yecheles. Everything is one, and the possibilities are infinite. Nekudim, as opposed to the second level, which is called Nekudim, which is Nechal Kulas and Nekudis. It was divided up into 10 points. And if you start out as 1, and you irradiate into 10 points, and the 10 is going to become 100, and the 100 is going to become 1,000, and the 1,000 has become 10,000, the 10,000 is going to become 100,000, and 100,000 become 1,000,000, and so forth and so on, you're obviously going from unity to division, from a better state to a worse state. But then he says, after the 10 Nekudis is Brudim. Brudim means 10 dots that are attached by stripes, by lines. Shu'elam Atikin, which is the world of order, the world of correction, which is Atzilus, the world of form. So, an idea that we spend probably 40 minutes on, by dividing it up into 2, Yecheles and Koyach, our Maimon divides up into 3, Yecheles, a lower level of Koyach, and a middle level. And as I said to you before, though the Maimon divides it up into 3, you could divide it up into as many as you want. But there would be, at the top there would be Yecheles, at the bottom there would be actualization, Paltiel, and in between you would have the complicated intermediates. What is it about the complicated intermediates? Very simple. All the intermediate levels are going from unity to division, and that's a bad thing. It's a negative thing. The very lowest level, which our Maimon calls Brudim, it's the ultimate division. But somehow on this lowest level there's a certain unity that supersedes, that makes it greater than all of the divisions discussed in the worlds above it. And that's the spirit of what's going to follow now. Again, we started off with 2 ideas, absolute plainness and absolute form. We're now dividing it, absolute plainness, absolute form, and semi-form. And the argument is going to be that absolute form is closer to absolute plainness than is semi-form, the lowest level, because it's the purpose, has something in common with Yecheles, with unity that the Koyches Ne'elam and Atzmim do not possess. V'zeu shekosav Eliyahu, as Eliyahu Navi says it, Antu adapikas asar tikun, you bring forward 10 separate vessels, Shem es spheres de Brudim, the 10 spheres of the lowest world, the world of real division. So we have 3 levels. A level where everything is unified, a level where everything is divided, and a level in between. It says the Rebbe Amnam, to be sure, Shorosh Mamakedam, the root and source of the 10 revealed spheres, as they exist distinctly, is Shehem Bechinas Akudim, they come from the world of Akud. And in the world of Akudim, Areim B'Kli Yachad Mamish, they're in one vessel. In Atzilos, they're truly divided. In Akudim, they're truly unified. They're Kol Bechinas, all aspects, such as Chochma, Bina, V'Cholu, as they exist in the highest world, are part of the plainness, part of the infinite plainness. Finally, Fishem, the Maila, because they're all together above, Mimhus, and being distinct aspects. Bechinas Chochma or Bechinas Bina, Hayaduim Da'atzilos. And in Akudim, all the divisions break down, and all there is the unity. Line 56, that's why they're called hidden spheres, because there's no actual spheres, there's actual unity in Ein Sof, which hides within itself infinite possibility, including infinite possibility for the spheres. It says the Rebbe on line 57, the illustration for these 2 or 3 ideas, namely, the idea that on the highest level there's a simple oneness that's defined by possibility rather than potential and detail. And the idea that there's the actual division of tools and potentials and actualization and so on can be understood in the neshama. Hinei keches hanefesh. The neshama's faculties, hamislapshin be'evri aguf, when they actually reveal themselves in the body's limbs. Harihem mischalkim. Not only is the body divided up into different aspects and sections, the various parts of the neshama that infuse themselves, that bring life to the various aspects of the body are equally divided. Kol keach muhus b'fnei atzmei ube'evim miyuchad b'fnei atzmei. Each faculty is a character of its own, and its presence is in a specific limb. Ke'echad ba'ayin, the power to see is only in the eye. V'ke'echashmi ba'ezin, the power to hear is only in the ear. V'ke'echamais b'yadayim, the power to act is only in the hands. And this is not only true of the physical functions, but the more metaphysical functions, for example, the power of intellectual creativity and thoroughness is in the mind. Is believed, the power of emotion and emotional manifestation and expression is in the heart. Says the Rebbe, when the neshama comes into the guf, these divisions exist not only in the body but in the neshama. Continues the Rebbe on line 61, V'hine. Kol keicheselu, all of these faculties that are divided in individual, nimshachim u'mispashtim, are drawn and radiate min hanefesh ha'achas, from something that on the highest level is an indivisible unity in soul. She etzem echad, which is one essence. V'im kein. Therefore, the question becomes, hachiluke keiches hanal, the division of faculties. As they're part of the unity of the soul. And just for the purposes of the Kabbalists keeping score, there's nefesh koilel koiches, which is the highest level of koiches atzmim. And there's nefesh noise koiches, which is the level of yecheles. Vada, it is certain, hayukulam beskal lasachas mamish. They're really all one. They're integrated into a oneness. And in the neshama itself, we call it yecheles. Possibility rather than koyach, which is potential, without any kind of division whatsoever. Just as the neshama is one, the radiations from the neshama are in a state of oneness. Says the Rebbe, how could this be? We see that when the neshama comes forward and goes into a body, seeing and hearing are two distinct faculties. So how in the neshama are they one, and outside of the neshama there are many? The answer is, as these faculties exist in the neshama, they're very theoretical, and very spiritual, in an immeasurable way, from the form that they take on to go into the body. And the difference between how they exist in the neshama in its essence and how they exist in the neshama that goes into a body, in the neshama it's as if they're actually one, and in the body they're divided up. Now, I'm not going to get into the specifics of such words as which sounds like kechetz atzmim as opposed to yocheles. We're going to be basic and general and say that the mashal is, on the highest level of the neshama there's no detail. On the lowest level of the neshama there's actual detail. And the same is true on high. On the highest levels of Ein Sof, of godliness, there is Yecheles. On the lowest level of godliness, which is Atzilus, you have Koyach and Poil, actual division. Says the Rebbe on line 68, the same is true also when we talk about how these ideas are understood mystically, metaphysically. The way godliness is in Atzilus. Shem kol bechina bekli b'fnei atzmei. There are different vessels. Chochma bechina b'fnei atzmei, v'chesed bechina b'fnei atzmei v'chulu. Chochma is in its own vessel and chesed is in its own vessel. And accordingly, they're actually separate. Line 70, however, as opposed to b'shosh, as they are in their root. Bebechines eses sfidas hagnuzis. In the state of the 10 hidden sfidas. According to that opinion of Kabbalah, that says it is Eses Firas Hagnuzis on the level of Oyer, on the level of Shemes, on the level of Yecheles, which is how this Maamar seems to be teaching it. They're much higher and much finer and much more sublime, le'en ketz, in an immeasurable way, ad shesham, the way the 10 Sfiras exist on the level of Yecheles, em kulam davar echad mamash, they're literally one. Stop. So the mashal of the neshama before it comes into the body and after it comes into the body is representing the two ideas. The idea of unity on the level of yecheles, which is the word we're using, and the idea of division on the level of koyach and poil, which is again the words that we're using. And now the Rebbe says, the higher level, the level of Yechelis and unity is V'zehu Shehei Makudim B'Kli Echad Mamish. That's called Akudim, where they're all tied down into one vessel. And again, one vessel is not zero vessels, so higher than Akudim is Ak, and Ak is called Sheirish Neshamas Negufis, and that's really Shemis, that's really Yechelis. But we're going to learn this Maamar simply that Akudim is Yechelis. On the other hand, the other extreme, 72 now, V'zeh Shabbat Tzilus. In the world of Atzilus, here there's real division, real separation, real form. Chochma v'chesed heim shnei dvarim sheinim ze mizeh. Chochma and chesed are absolutely separate. Hainu lefi, the reason for this is because shechochma the Atzilus, the godliness which comes out into the vessel of Chochma of Atzilus, which is individuated and separated, and with a form, Eina be'erech klal, cannot at all be compared to Mehus HaChochma D'Akudim Kanal. To Mehus HaChochma D'Akudim, as Chochma exists as a part of the plainness of Akudim, which we're calling Yechelis. V'kanal, as we explained earlier in tonight's class, Shehi, that Atzilus is Anikra Chochma Yediyah, is known Chochma. And Chochma D'Akudim is Chochma She'en Yediyah, we don't know it. It's good, yeah? So far, so good. We have two ideas so far. We have the idea of Yecheles, how everything is part of a unity, and we have how things are actual form, and so forth. But remember, the concept of two that we spoke about earlier in the Shir, in the Kisvei Harizal, becomes three. What's the middle one called? Nekudim. What's the concept of the middle one? A little bit separate. Akudim is absolute unity, Berudim is absolute division, and Nekudim is semi-divided. Says the Rebbe on line 75, in between the world of total oneness, which is called Yecheles or Akudim, and the world of total division, which is Kayach and Paltiel, there is individual intermediate state called Nekudim, 10 points. V'sham, and in the world called Nekudim, called Sfira B'fnei Atzmi. Also in Nekudim there's 10 separated spheres, and in some way there's even a concept of Kayches on a level of Helam. V'heinas and Nekudis are 10 points. V'hainu, this means Shekvar yordu b'yirida gedelo, they have already fallen very substantially. Mimadreges as the spheres the Akudim, from the way they existed on the true state of unity. Shem kulam davar echad kanal, because they're all one. Masha'enkin, as opposed to be'es spheres the Nekudim, when they come down to the 10 spheres of Nekudim, they become 10 points. And then the Rebbe concludes, it's not the Chochma we know, because we only know Chochma that's really in Kalim, which is called Berudim, but relative to Akudim, Nekudim is also 10. So the Alter Rebbe now inserts a middle level. The highest level is absolute unity and plainness, the lowest level is absolute division, and in between that are the steps of the slow breakdown from the one into many. And again, for the purposes of philosophy, there's one individual, one intermediate stage. But if you think about it, there's probably many, but it doesn't matter how many. It matters the concept. There's a level where everything is one, there's a level where everything is many, and you have the steps where it's going from the one to the many, which is represented by Nekudim. So now, let's repeat the question. I asked you, I'm starting, by the way, from line 97. The first 3 lines I'm not reading. I want to ask you the question again. Remember I asked you which is better, infinite plainness or individuation in form? And of course the only answer is depends on your perspective. Let us assume that unity and infinite plainness is superior to detail and form. So which is better, Nekudim or Berudim? A world which is partially divided or a world which is totally divided? That's the question. Now, logically, the answer would be, whoever is closer to greater unity is higher. So Akudim is the ultimate unity, Nekudim is a lesser unity, and Berudim would be the lowest unity. But our Maamar is going to say something else. Our Maamar is going to say that you go from unity to division, you're going from a greater state to a lesser state. The lowest world with the maximum division has the greatest division. But because it's the purpose of creation, somehow in that lowest world, there is a unity that makes it superior to all the worlds above itself that are the various stages of the dividing the one into the many. Let's find out how. V'hine. Line 97. Every world that's not one, where things begin to divide, which is included the representative of the Nekudim, has a shvira. It breaks. Which is alternatively called the world of Tayu. Why? You go from 1 to 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 and so on. Why would the worlds that are semi-divided shatter, break, and the lowest world, Brudim, which is the ultimately divided world, is tikkun, is sustained? Why? So he answers. There are only 10 points. And because there are only 10 points, it's called echad b'china b'fnei atzmo. Each one is one to itself. Imagine you have 10 people, and each one is excellent in one thing. One is very creative. One is very analytical and thorough. But the creative one can't be analytical at all. And the analytical one has no creativity. One is kind. One is precise in judging. But each one has only one mile. So they're each one a genius in their own way. They can have zero cooperation. Zero. Now imagine people who are not exceptional in one way, but they have a little bit of each faculty. They may excel in creativity, but they have a little understanding and analytical skill. They may be exceptional in kindness, but they have the ability to be judging and exacting and precise and so forth. Which is superior? The 10 geniuses, who each one is extreme in his way and is completely incompatible with the other 9? Or the lesser geniuses, who because they're not so extreme in the one faculty that's outstanding in them, they have within themselves the other faculties of their fellows to a lesser degree? And of course the answer is that the latter is much better than the former. Why? Because if you have just one faculty and you don't share any faculty with anybody else, there can be no comprehensive, there can be no cohesion between you and anybody else. But if every person has a little bit of every mile, although each one excels in one way, they share something with everybody. If you're exceptional in Bina and I'm exceptional in Chokhmah, but I have a little Bina too, and you have a little Chokhmah, we can share what we are. And that's the difference between the middle stage and the final stage. There's the beginning of a division, but the beginning of the division is a semi-division. You divide things up into 10 and that's it. No 100, no 1,000, no 10,000. Which means Chokhmah is only Chokhmah, Bina is only Bina. So you've gone away from unity and you've created division. Division is unsustainable. As opposed to line 98 now, the world of Atzilus, the world of the ultimate division. But the world of ultimate division is interesting. The ultimate division doesn't only mean you have many, many, many different parts. Ultimate division means every individual part has within itself all the other parts. Like every person, even though one is exceptional in Chokhmah, and one in Bina, and one in Chesed, and one in Gvura, each one of those people has the faculties of all their fellows to a lesser degree. So they can share, they can integrate. The Hebrew word for this is hiskalalus, interconnectedness or inclusiveness. And Chassidus argues that only on the lowest levels, where all the details are manifest, all the individual aspects are stretched out and put forward, can there be a reunification. And the reunification is because on the level of maximum division, in each detail, you have all the other details. On the level of intermediate division, things are beginning to divide, but they don't fully manifest. Each detail is an akud, there's a pintel, it excludes others. Only on the lowest level, we have the maximum division. Is the nature of the division so divided that each part has all the other parts, and on that basis they can be all integrated? In other words, though all of us understand that unity is on the highest level, and then as you go from unity to division, you're going from one to many. Ironically, on the lowest level, which is the purpose of creation, there is a reunification. But not a reunification where everything is one. A reunification where you have the maximum number of possibilities, but because you have the maximum number of possibilities, and possibilities within possibilities, everybody shares with everybody and they join together in a hiskalalus. The intermediate worlds shatter. And therefore, as it turns out, to use a classic cliche, Noah's tchilas on the highest level of unity in a plain way, the lowest level of unity The lowest level of division is a unity in a complex way. The levels in between are neither here nor there, and that's not good. And that's what the Rebbe now describes. And then you have the world of brud, which is the world of order and constructiveness. What does that mean? Everything becomes a complete face. The right is linked to the left is linked to the right. They're both linked by the center. How could you link the right and the left? Simple, because in the left there's a little bit of right. How could you link left to right? Because in right there's a little bit of left. But that's only possible when you reduce. When a person is exceptional in one way, he's exclusive of everybody else. When a person is more balanced, so he has a little bit of every other person within himself, he can join with all those other people. That's what tikkun means. The maximum number of details, and somehow, ironically, in the maximum number of details, there's a preferred, there's a superior unification than the worlds of partial division where the Shvita takes place. That's where the integration takes place. Since each aspect has a little bit of each other aspect, they find each other, they recognize each other, they fuse. So in the maximum division, you have the ultimate unity. Chokhmah is not by itself. It includes all 10 spheres. How could Chokhmah connect to Bina? Because in Chokhmah there's a little Bina. How could Bina connect to Chokhmah? Because in Bina there's little Chokhmah. But that's only on the level of, as the expression is, Kelim Eruv and Eretz Mu'atim, on a level that's reduced, not on a level which is concentrated. V'nikra Partzufav, it's called the complete face of Chokhmah. The complete face of Chokhmah includes all the other 10 spheres. V'chein Partzuv Zod, the face of the emotions, Shigir Bechinas Hamidis, Ach at the same time, Kulan Hayaklulim Yachad, all the other aspects of other Ma'alyan are included together. V'gam Amechen Davam Me'idin Behem. Stop. And the Rebbe concludes on line 103, Vareze Maila Yiseira, this is a greater advantage, Mebechinas Nekudim, from the level which is called Nekudim, where you have individual aspects, but they're in a state of atzmiyus, in a state of individuation, separateness. Shoyarak kol bechina b'fnei atzmi, everyone is by itself. Chesed levade, chesed is alone. Gevura levade, gevura is alone. And that's the reason for the Shvita. Avo b'tikun, in the lowest world, where the division is even more, and the individual faculties are even weaker, ironically, in the maximum division, you can achieve the maximum unification. Yesh bechinas eskal, there's an integration and a unity. And that is the magic of this Maamar. The purpose of this Maamar was not to talk about two, but to talk about three. It's not there's a place where everything is one, and there's a place where everything is many. There's a place where everything is one in a plain way. And then there are many places where everything is many. And then there is a place where there's the maximum number of details and parts. And on that lowest level, you have the maximum of details, all those parts. Each one of them is so weak by itself, it joins with all the rest. That's Elam Atikam. That's permanent. And now we learn a magic word. What we're about to read is a key to this whole idea. The word that denotes this concept, that there is unity at the end of the road, there's unity in the maximum division, is Ma. Look on line 112. Ma. Now, of course, you know that this Maamar is based to a considerable degree on the Pasach Eliyahu. And in the Pasach Eliyahu, you have the description of Yud Kei Vav Kei, and it says the words, the Iyu Shei Ma. Ma. And then it says Kazeh. Yud is Yud Vav Daled, Hey Aleph, Vav Aleph, Vav Hey Aleph. Ma happens to have the numerical equivalent of 45, which is the Gematria Adam. A mensch. What's a mensch? No extremes. Balance and integration. In Chassidus, Ma means bittul. And the argument is that of all the worlds of Ein Sof, the lowest is Atzilus. In all the worlds of Ein Sof, the place of maximum division is Atzilus. But Atzilus, which is the lowest level of Ein Sof, and the maximum number of divisions is a mensch. The worlds higher than Atzilus are not mentioned. They're Behemoth Rabbah. They're super animals. And in a mensch, there's Hiskalolus. Why? No Tchilos and B'Seif. And this property of Ma, which is Adam, mensch, or total, bittul, shows itself on the lowest levels. So just like on the highest level there's unity because there's no detail, on the lowest level there's unity because there's the maximum detail and humility and bittul ma, which the higher worlds don't have. This is a fascinating concept. It's discussed in many Maamar Chassidus, that Atzilus is the lowest of the worlds of Ein Sof, and it has a property higher than all of the worlds of Ein Sof above itself, or many of the worlds of Ein Sof above itself. It's the bittul property, it's the ma property. And the intricacy of it, the complexity of it, the richness of it, is that this ma property that Atzilus has is primarily in the kelim and not in the eretz. It's in the vessels and not in the light. As I'll explain later, perhaps. And the Rebbe says on line 112, this has to do with the divine name Ma, 45, which is Yud, K, Vav, K, as you spell Yud, Vav, Dalad, Hey, Aleph, Vav, Aleph, Vav, Hey, Aleph. Do the math, you'll come up to 45, which radiates in the world, which is called Tikkun. And Tikkun means order, balance, integration. That although it's the lowest world, it's higher than all of the worlds that are stages in division. Its root is Adam Kadmon. And Adam Kadmon is the place of real unity, the place of Shemos, the place of Yecheles, which is a light on a level of Klal, as we discussed before about Kudim. For some reason, the Rebbe doesn't see a contradiction between Ak and Akudim, even though they're two different worlds. We're not going to worry about it. Okay, therefore, Mimenu Nimshach Hatikun. Atzilus draws from the highest level of oneness, of Yechelis, of Ma, to itself a bittul, which becomes the basis for the world of Tikkun. Sheyenase Hiskalalus. Brudim, that integration should take place in the world of Brudim, V'hainu kishem Ma, because Ma means bittul, Miloshen v'nachnu Ma, V'haeskalalus, Nimshach machmas ha-bittul le'nintzei baruch hu, and this integration has to do with that bittul, V'lachein ha'idei shema, through shema, nasa gamkin eskalas v'asfir zatik, and that's where Atzilus has the maximum unity. And although I didn't plan this, I am making the decision right now to stop this shir, and to continue this in the next year, but I'm going to advertise. I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. We're going to talk next week about Hiskalalus. There's a very comprehensive conversation in Chassidus about Hiskalalus integration, which we'll share, and specifically the idea of Ma and Hiskalalus as they have to do with Kalim. Stay tuned.